Hi everyone and welcome to Hot Topics this evening. Here we are again in March 2024. So it seems to have come around very quickly despite February having that extra day this year. It's still a short month, so it seems to have been no time at all since I was here talking to you last. So do please say hello in the chat if you haven't already. I see a few of you have already said hello. And of course, this live stream is open to everyone and it will be available on replay afterwards if you don't have time to stay or indeed if you want to watch it again. Let's have a look to see who is here. So hi to Alison and David and Barbara and Denise and the Old Get What Games. So thank you all for being with me this evening. I hope some others will join us soon. And this is the first of our live streams in March. I'll be back again next week for an exclusive for our Superfan members, and then back again on Monday the 25th, which will be our Bits and Pieces live stream, where I'll be picking on 3 or 4 smaller topics to discuss. So those might have been questions that you asked me in video comments, or maybe issues I've come across in my work, or perhaps things I've spotted on social media that have happened recently. So if you do have anything you would like me to discuss in either Hot Topics or Bits and Pieces, then please do let me know in the comments somewhere on the channel. And each month I will pick some of them to talk about and have a look at your questions as we go along. So let's see if anyone else has popped in while I've been talking. So hi Marie, morning to Marie and Lynn and Jeff and Mr. Piggy. Hi Mr. Piggy. So lovely to see you all here. I'd like to, as always, give a shout out to my channel members. You know who you are. They're the ones in the chat with the little squares with a paw print next to their names. The colour of the paw print reflects how long they've been a member. Whoops, I'm picking up my coat there along with my cup of tea. So, of course, I'll put that down there. Does that help? So it's very easy to sign up as a channel member. And if you change your mind, you can cancel at any time. And you can also change the level of the membership at any time. So there's only a really quite small commitment on that part. If that is something you would like to do, have a look at the video on the main page about joining. And of course, if you'd like to show your appreciation of this live, then do please tick the like button, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We hit the big 3,000 subscribers just last week, which is hugely exciting. I also know from the channel statistics that about half of our viewers aren't subscribed. So this means that maybe some 6,000 people are now watching the videos. And I'm just amazed because I never expected it to grow anything like as much as it's done. So it's pretty fantastic to get the support that we're getting for the videos and to see how we've come in really quite a short time. So as well as ticking the like button and subscribing, you can also support the channel with our super chat or super thanks and make a one-off contribution. And that helps us to keep making content here for you on YouTube. So if that's something you'd like to do, just click on the little $sign. That squeaky noise in the background is Gandalf coming in, which could be causing some trouble in a moment, as there is nowhere much for him to sit. Oh yes, okay, ignore the fun in the background as Mr. G decides to take his seat. He's not doing terribly well at the moment. He's got quite a lot of pain. We're off to the vets tomorrow for a review of his pain medication, which has expired. So I'm hoping they can help him when we go tomorrow afternoon. So as I was saying, if you'd like to support the channel, then you can make a one-off contribution using that little $sign alongside the chat bar. And it's also on the screen if you watch any of the shorts or any of the other videos. I'd also like to thank the lovely people who've sent us treats this month. And the guys have asked me to pass along their thanks for your kindness. They enjoyed a box of gravy bones from Mr. Piggy, and also the sausages from Alison Matthews have now arrived. Thank you very much. The sausages were very interesting. I had to hide them upstairs because Gandalf was much too interested in acquiring the entire bag for himself. And we've also had some biscuits from Alison, which we shared with some other foster greyhounds who live near us. And if you watch last Friday's short, then you will have seen the guys enjoying the duck fillets that came from their Auntie Lynn not so long ago. And that had me standing on the bench because it was a bit too exciting for them for me to stand on the floor, and I was getting mugged. And the editor is working on the other videos of them enjoying their gifts, and those should be out soon. And remember, if you're the first person to send any of the items on the Amazon wish list, we will do a short video for you too, so you can see how my in-house testers got on with it. So today, thinking about things that smell nice, our subject is the dog's nose and their sense of smell. So I'll be moving on to talk about that any moment. I'll just check back into the comments to see where we're at. And where are we? Yes, Alison, their poor Auntie Alison is holed up at home with a poorly ankle. So we're hoping very much that your ankle's feeling better soon, and that you are perhaps able to be entertained by binge watching some of the videos in the meantime. And I have lots of people saying hi to Gandalf. Gandalf has now acquired the bed that Maggie was on. She has been ushered into her crate by the editor and the gate shut to stop Gandalf attacking her. He's been getting quite grouchy the last couple of days with not feeling so well himself. And Lynn says she hasn't seen that short yet. Yes, check out the shorts. It should be the most recent one. It came out last Friday with them enjoying the bag of duck fillets. And I do find it's all very well saying, well, we'll teach them to have their feet on the floor around exciting things, but you have to take your battles and choose the ones that you can win. And keeping feet on the floor whilst there are duck fillets, or for that matter, those sausages, that involves some feet on the counter, those sausages. So things like that are more than they can deal with. We can keep feet on the floor when it's things like gravy bones and marrowbone rolls, or even maybe training treats, but not sausages and duck fillets. So that got a bit excitable, and I had to stand on the bench in the garden to hand them out. I'm going to put my tea back up there. Okay, so moving on to have a think about this month's topic, which is the dog's nose. So I'm going to talk a little bit about their sense of smell, and then some of the ways that that might be a good thing or perhaps even a bad thing. So let's get started on that. So we humans are primarily orientated towards our sense of vision. Unless we have a problem with our vision, if we're visually impaired, then our other senses tend to become stronger or highlighted. But if our sense of vision is working, the others tend to recede to some extent. And that reliance on our vision then masks our other senses. And it's only when we can't see that we realize just how strong those senses can be. So with a dog, it's quite different. Their main sense of smell is olfaction. Their main sense is olfaction, or the sense of smell. And their ability to detect odors well and truly puts our ability to shame. We might think we have a sensitive nose, and we perhaps do by our standards, but dogs can detect things up to 100,000 times stronger. So they can detect odors that we find completely undetectable. And I get that every time I go out and I go to see some dogs, and then I come back after my appointment and I have to be thoroughly sniffed, because they are drawing in all the information about everything that happened while I was away. They can detect chemicals with just subtle differences in the structure and at concentrations of 1 part per trillion, which is 1 in 1 followed by 12 noughts. So that is equivalent to 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools, or the analogy that really brings it home to me, that's the equivalent of 1 second of time, like 1 tick of your clock, in approximately 31,700 years. And that is the level of sensitivity that they have with their sense of smell. It means they have the potential to detect a person who is 20 kilometers away, which to me is pretty mind-blowing. And I remember a while back finding them just as interested in my doggy laundry after it had been washed as before it had been washed, which just goes to show that putting a set of laundry through the wash at 40 degrees with laundry liquid and maybe some conditioner is effective by human standards. I thought it was quite nice when it came out, but by doggy standards, they could clearly still smell whatever it had on it before, because they were just as interested in this particular batch of washing that came from the kennels afterwards as they were before it went in the wash. So that just goes to show everything is relative when it comes to what our senses detect. And we do get very used to the world according to our own senses rather than necessarily recognizing what is possible. So our appreciation of the world is completely different to a dog's appreciation of the world. They can detect things that can be really quite useful to humans, as you probably heard about, not just things like sniffing out drugs at the airport or detecting bombs, but they can detect odors associated with disease. And you sometimes come across a story where someone has said, my dog was interested in sniffing that mole on my arm and it turned out to be cancerous. Well, they can detect the odors associated with cancer smells, and they can even detect that odor from bandages that have been used to cover skin cancer, from tissue samples, or from the breath of the person that has that cancer. They can also recognize blood sugar changes in a diabetic person, so they can identify that that person is going to have a problem with the balance of their blood sugar before the person is aware of the symptoms themselves. And they can warn of a person of being about to have a seizure up to 45 minutes before that person is taken ill, because of changes that are already happening in their body that that person isn't yet aware of. And I saw an interesting study when COVID-19 had been around for a couple of years, I think it was. So early, maybe 22, 23, something like that. And they were training dogs to detect people infected with COVID-19. And the results of their assessments showed 94% accuracy, even in people who had no symptoms of COVID-19. So the dogs were much more effective at detecting people with COVID-19 than those wonderful tests that we had sent through our letterboxes and handed out at the supermarkets, and now have the privilege of paying quite a lot of money for. And of course, will have involved a lot of paper, plastic and chemicals, all of which went into the waste. All of that could have been avoided by training dogs to detect it instead. And this was done because they thought it would be a much more effective way of using the dogs in airports, detecting people coming in and out of the country with COVID-19. And it did prove to be considerably quicker and more effective, more accurate than other options for testing. So what is it about their noses that makes them so incredibly powerful? Your dog's nose has got unique anatomy, and I don't mean it's like a big prune on the end of their face compared with our noses. It has been designed to optimize scent detection and isolate the competing cells. So within each nasal cavity, there are 3 convoluted structures which increase the surface area, and they're called turbinates. And basically it's a whirly thing up their nose, like a convoluted curly structure inside their nose. That means that there is more surface area for there to be cells that can detect chemicals, and different cells detect different chemicals. So you have lots of cells that specialize in different things. And they have hundreds and hundreds of tiny hairs or cilia, which enhance the scent detection even more. Now, as breeds vary considerably in the size and the shape of their snouts, think of a greyhound compared with, say, a staffy or with a pug, the number and type of the receptors varies as well. So not all dogs are alike in their ability to detect scents, but even the worst equipped canine has an amazing sense of smell compared with us. So we have far fewer receptors and only 25 hairs on each one. They have hundreds more hairs and literally thousands more receptors. So they just have this amazing capacity to direct, to identify different scents. Their noses also can control the airflow much more precisely than we can. I remember back when I was teaching yoga, one of the things we often did in class was alternate nostril breathing. And to do that, you needed to close a nostril or open a nostril in order to direct the airflow. Dogs don't need to bother with that, using their paws to move their nostrils around. They can do that just with muscles. So they can control the way the air flows in. They can breathe separately through the left and the right. And the air goes in through the front and it comes out that little curly bit at the side. Each nostril operates separately. So they can locate smells in 3 dimensions and also judge distance. The left nostril connects to things that are familiar, so food or fun stuff, things that they recognize. So if you're their mommy or daddy, it's you that they're going to detect via the left nostril. And their right nostril is used when it comes to things that are worrying. So with a dog like Floppy or Gandalf, with his sniffing out things he might be frightened of, it's his right nostril that's coming into play here. And this is the one they use to sniff other dogs. So depending on the side of the nose that they direct the air through, they are using it in different ways. Quick slurp of tea. And let's have a look at the comments. So Alison had a laugh at me standing on the bench. Yeah, it was quite funny. I have to say the bench is quite sturdy. I wasn't at risk of falling off the bench, though if they jumped up, it could have been interesting. And David said he's heard they can smell a thunderstorm coming. I'm not sure about that. I know with thunderstorms, it said that they detect the change in barometric pressure. So it's the air pressure that changes that they can detect. It's possible they can also smell it because you do get a change in the air when there's a thunderstorm, more associated with the lightning, I believe. So they might smell something, and certainly their sense of smell is quite capable of detecting the changes that would occur. And Mr. Piggy says, why do they sometimes seem to use their mouth when having a good sniff? Yes, we're coming on to that bit later on. Hold that thought, Mr. Piggy. And Alison says it's very clever. Yes, it is very clever. It's amazingly clever. I think we get so wrapped up in thinking that how we do things is the way for them to be done, that it's quite hard to imagine how the world might be if you perceived it differently, because we can only perceive it through the senses we have. And it's really quite difficult to imagine that they have the equivalent of bionic smell. And one thing I've always wondered is, if their sense of smell is so powerful, why do they have to be so pushy when it comes to sniffing? So when I come home and Jim has to actually push his nose quite firmly against my trousers. He actually wedges his nose against me and I can feel him pushing. It's not just a delicate sniff. He's actually really pressing against my trousers or my arm or something to sniff. So it's not that they're just detecting through the air, they're actually making physical contact. And sniffing is a specific activity. It's different to panting or to breathing. And the actual sniffing enhances their ability to detect the different odors. So when Jim presses his nose against me, what he's actually doing is causing the molecules that he can smell to dissolve in the dampness on his nose, and then they are directly transmitted to the receptor cells. So it's almost like he's absorbing in a liquid those scent molecules. He's not just receiving them in the air, they're actually flowing into his nose on the moisture that is on his nose. So having that cold, wet nose helps him to his sense of smell to be heightened compared with a dry nose, such as we have. Another question that has often concerned me, or perhaps made me wonder, is how do they cope in a heavily scented environment? So, given how strong their sense of smell is, even if we don't think of our house as having a strong or specific scent, we do tend to buy products that have a fragrance. And it can actually be quite hard to find a fragrance-free option. And even if we did, our dog could probably smell the components of that product. So even if we don't have it with cotton fresh or pine forest or something as part of the smell, they will be able to smell the list of ingredients that it would have if they were printed on the container. So this means that our houses are just awash with scent, from cleaning products, with laundry liquids, our hand wash, and the natural smells from us and the other things in the house. And if you imagine, say, you get some new furniture, or in particular a carpet, or you use a glue, then we can bring quite powerful smells into our house. And I remember when I was, it must have been at junior school, long time ago, we had a strange arrangement. One of the rooms was like an indoor amphitheatre. So it was a semicircle and it was tiered downwards. And there was one holiday where it flooded with sewage. Obviously, it's a problem with the drains, and the low bit where the carpet was flooded, and they replaced the carpet, and that absolutely stank for weeks and weeks and weeks afterwards. And I can remember, it was definitely when I was at junior school, which was rather a long time ago, but I can still clearly remember being obliged to be in that room at the age of less than 10 years old, and the smell of that carpet. And another thing I remember quite strongly more recently, they did some decorating in one of the halls I used to teach yoga in, and they used an oil-based paint, which I didn't even realise they could still do these days. And of course, in a room that's hired out, it's not ventilated, the windows and doors are not typically open, and the smell of that paint hung around for literally months because it never got the air exchange with outdoors because the doors were just kept closed. So we can detect scents when they're that powerful. How do they cope with scents that are strong like that? And how do they even cope with that myriad of smells that are really not terribly natural in the case of many of them, that come from all the things that are in houses? And how do they cope with the smell of their own bottom sometimes, given that we end up feeling like we're going to pass out from having to be in the same room as some of their emissions? And I think part of the answer to that is that the brain is very good at pushing things it doesn't need into the background. And we do this all the time. So if you close your eyes for a moment, go on, be brave, no one's watching, or probably not watching. If you close your eyes for a moment and then focus on what you can hear, you might start to notice lots of sounds you weren't aware of before. So yes, you can hear me talking, but maybe you can hear the fans on the PC. Maybe you can hear people walking past outside, Or is there a clock ticking in the room? Or your clothes rustling? Or if you've got a dog in the room, can you hear their breathing? Can you hear your own breathing? And those sounds are always there, but we don't typically notice them if we don't need to, because if we did, our brain just couldn't keep up with all the information. And this reminds me of something I remember being told again when I was teaching yoga, of a surgeon saying that he would rather fly a jumbo jet or a big airplane with no instruction, never having done it before, than have to take control of all the processes of his liver on a moment by moment basis, because what the body does is so complicated that you would never cope. And on a smaller scale, they ignore that big picture of all the different smells because it's not relevant at that time. So the brain gets all that information and it sifts it out as to relevant or not relevant, and it discards the irrelevant stuff, because otherwise you would just be totally and utterly overwhelmed by everything that was happening all the time if your brain didn't sieve it out for you. So let's have a quick look. Mr. Piggy says that Joe hates lamb cooking. That is a common one with dogs, and I don't know why, but you hear of it so often. There's something about the smell of lamb cooking, and it's bizarre, isn't it? Because there's often, when you go to the pet shop, there's quite often dog food with lamb in it. So when it's already in the food, it doesn't, I presume, cause a problem. But the smell of it cooking does seem to be very difficult for some dogs, and I've never figured that out why. So if anyone has any suggestions, please do put those in the comments. I have heard it said that is it because lamb is often cooked with rosemary, and is it the rosemary that upsets them? But I think when I saw that suggested, other people saying, oh well, I didn't cook it with rosemary and it was still a problem. So I'm not sure that it can be that. And David says that he's been awakened in the middle of the night from emissions. That must have been some serious emissions if they've actually woken you up from sleep. That's pretty grim. Or was it the noise of the emission that woke you up? And by the time you surfaced, the smell was filling the room. That's pretty grim. So basically, dogs cope with all the different odors because they only really smell or detect the odors to their full ability if they actively sniff. So they are then deliberately drawing air in through the nostrils in short huffs with the mouth closed. And then, unlike us as well, they can divide the air between odor detection and breathing. And that is why they can spend so long sniffing at the same thing without appearing to stop. So next time you're out and you're standing there thinking, oh my God, when you're going to finish sniffing, watch them and you will hopefully be able to see that they can just sniff and sniff and sniff and sniff and sniff, but they don't have to stop to breathe. Whereas if we sniff, we do it as part of an inhalation. So you can only sniff in for so long to inhale the fragrance before you have to stop and breathe out. They can just keep going. So that is a way of them, Grandad streaming, to just keep going for longer and longer and make even more out of the thing that they are able to smell. And another thing, another aspect of sniffing, which goes back to Mr. Piggy's comment about why do they sometimes seem to use their mouth when having a good sniff, is that thing they do when they seem to lick the scent or they get it on their nose and then it's taken into the mouth and they almost seem to taste it, and then they do that strange slobbery chattering thing that comes when they have taken that smell into their mouth. And you'll often see them doing this if they're checking out a location where another dog has peed. Most commonly a girl dog has peed and it's boy dogs doing the sniffing, but not always just that. And this is when they take the smell into an organ at the roof of the mouth called the vomeronasal organ. And this detects signals from chemicals that relate to behavioral and physiological signals from the body. So this is very close to the bit of the brain that detects smell. So it's almost got like a highway straight into the brain, into the parts of the brain that analyze smell, and it connects to the oldest part of the brain, which just shows how kind of part of the dog this is, how very instinctive this is to do this. So when they do that, usually it is something related to the presence of another dog in some way. So by tasting it in that way, they can identify things like whether a bitch has been around recently, whether she is sexually receptive or not. They can tell if other males have been there, they can recognize other males and so on. So that is used very specifically for things relating to understanding more about perhaps the threat or competition or impact that other dogs that have been in the area might have on them. So scent can also help dogs to recall memories formed in its presence, just the same as we do. And this is called associative memory. And it's thought that dogs create olfactory images that link odor with specific objects. And it's known that if they're following the smell of one person, but then they encounter a different one, they appear to be confused, which suggests that they had, based on the smell that they had been shown, they had expected to encounter a particular person. They'd anticipated that they would meet the person that that smell links to. And then when they don't, they're confused. So certainly smell, or a certain smell of a person, gives them an idea of who it is that they're going to meet. They recognize people by smell. And I remember a time when I went back to my mother's house, having gone there and dropped the dogs off and then gone out for a bit. And apparently they got restless as if I was coming back before mother had even heard the car. And given that the doors and windows were shut, I park at the front and then had to go around the back. It made me wonder, how did they know I was on my way back? So had they maybe heard my car? Or did they smell me? Or did they smell the car coming? And that kind of seems like magic, doesn't it? But there probably is something in their ability to perceive the world in a way that we can't, that explains it. So if your dog has done strange things that might relate to their sense of smell, let us know in the comments. And I'm going to take a look at the comments now. So do let me know if your dog has done strange things that might be explained by their amazing sense of smell. So David says that just the smell of those emissions woke him up. That's pretty powerful emissions. And Bo seems to like having a stroke if he smells good pee. I wonder, does he maybe like having a stroke because it calms him down if it's been upsetting? Or Voletta with the Chianti, yes, of course. And our listeners has, how can you completely get rid of wheat? I've tried everything. So what everything have you tried, Alison? Barbara says we use an enzymatic cleaner. Yeah, I think depending on the thing that it's on, I tend to go with something biological, because the biological part of it will eat the chemicals in the urine that cause the smell. Trying just to mask the smell, I find, just creates the most disgusting smell of wee plus cleaning product, which I think is actually worse than the smell of wee. For me, bicarb soda has been pretty helpful. That's good at neutralizing the smell. So I quite often will soak the area with bicarb soda and then get rid of that. And then some white wine vinegar, that's also quite good. More recently, I've tended to actually use a disinfectant that I know the vet uses, and that seems to be quite effective. And I tend to go on whether the other dogs ignore that location afterwards or not. I figure if they all ignore it, then I must have been reasonably successful. I think it's much harder if you're trying to get the smell out of soft fabrics that can't go in the wash. So if it's got on carpets or rugs that can't be washed thoroughly, that can be more difficult. You can get commercial products, but I can't comment on those. I've never bought any of those because I'm a bit skeptical as how effective they are, and they are usually quite expensive. So I haven't actually tried any of those, but I've had reasonably good success with bicarb of soda followed by white wine vinegar, and or, depending on what it is, biological laundry liquid. So that those are my go-to. If anyone else has other go-tos, then please pop them in the comments and share your favorite formula for getting rid of pissy smells in your house. I agree, David. We would be amazed at what dogs understand. And Lynn says, Bert used to know when Simon was coming home each week, about 10 to 20 minutes. It's weird, isn't it? Because they must be way too far away to know. And it's possible it's to do with timing, or maybe we're interpreting it as if they know that someone's coming and it's really something else, but maybe it's not. It's interesting. If only they could tell us what it was that they were detecting. So any thoughts on strange things your dogs have done relating to smell, or any thoughts on your favorite product to get rid of pissy smells, then pop those in the comments and we will have a look. Thinking about what affects a dog's sense of smell, we'll be moving on to look at that next. And Grace says, gonna take evening walkies. We want to thank her. So we'll be thinking about smelling things while we're walking. Yes, perfect time. We'll be talking about that while you're out, Grace. So what affects their sense of smell? This probably applies to us as well, but I'm talking about dogs here. Their ability to smell or detect odors can be affected by being stressed, by taking exercise, by being unfit, and also their meal routine. So these are all things that have been experimented with to see whether it made a difference in dogs' abilities to detect scent in tests. Apparently, the amount of food they have, the fat content of the food, and the timing of the meals all have an impact on their ability to scent things. And this, of course, is important if you've got dogs that are working in a role where scent detection is important, because it could affect their success at, say, finding the drugs at the airport or finding people trapped after an earthquake, if they are going to be affected by what they've eaten and how recently. The air conditions are also important, and cooler and more humid air carries aromas more strongly. And I figure that is why my dogs love to snort around in the snow. We've not really, I think we had about half a dozen flakes one afternoon this winter here. But when we have had a lot of snow, mine love to go out and find somewhere where it's all piled up, and they literally dig their noses into it and start snorting and get quite excited. And I don't know why they're snorting, because you don't generally get the scent by breathing out, but it might be kind of clearing the air out so that they can get new air in. But Meggie in particular loves to snort around in the snow, and that cold air makes the smells more distinct to them. And I've often wondered if this is part of the reason that walking in the dusk can be more interesting to dogs, because their sense of vision is better than ours when it comes to low light. But also, of course, if it's that time of day where the temperature is dropping off and it's cooler, the smells are going to be more exciting. And of course, there's probably more things starting to come out at dusk to be smelt. So smelling things can be highlighted when it's cooler, and that might happen if you take them for a walk early or late. So that's a much better time for them to notice things through their sense of smell. If you've read any books by Alexandra Horowitz, you might have come across her talking about their sense of smell. Has anyone read any of theirs? Let me know in the comments. They're mostly really quite readable books. It's kind of science, but very consumable science. But one thing that I thought was fascinating is she has a theory that dogs can smell time based on the idea that once the scent gets put down, it changes with age, and in really quite subtle ways. And we're talking short periods of time. I'm not talking like a footprint left today versus a footprint left 3 weeks ago. We're talking about individual footprints in a trail will smell different to a trained dog. So if you take a dog to the middle of a trail with footprints going in each direction from a person that walked in one direction, the dog knows which way they went. And they know that from a trail as short as 5 footsteps, because the footsteps that were made earlier in time by seconds smell different to the ones that were later. So they know if I go this way, the person went this way because the footprints are getting newer. And that is where they came from, because that way the footprints are getting older. And I think that is pretty amazing. Of course, this is trained dogs. By contrast, untrained dogs are less likely to use their noses. And I think sniffing things out is something that has to be learnt, for greyhounds at least. So if you've had other breeds that needed to learn how to sniff, let me know. But certainly with my greyhounds, even the ones that have been with me for a while, and certainly when they're new, they do not seem to kind of comprehend the idea of using their noses to find things. Now, they clearly can. They have functional noses. They're very good at sniffing stuff. But they don't seem to get this idea of, I can find it by sniffing. So if I drop a treat on the floor, quite often they look at me and as if to say, can I have a treat, please? And I'll say, there's one on the floor. And they don't sniff the floor to look for it. I have to actually bend down and point and put my finger next to the treat. And then they find the treat with their sense of vision because they're following where I pointed. So following pointing cues is something that dogs are very good at doing. And they think that's part of how they have adapted, how they've evolved in connection with humans, is to learn to pick up cues like pointing from us. And I don't know if this is a greyhound thing or if it's another dog thing as well, because the last time I owned other dogs, I was too young to be really thinking about these things. But even if I have to literally put my hand pointing right on that treat on the floor for them to find it, and they might sniff within inches of it and not find it until I point at it. So they clearly are not actively sniffing in a way that they can find it. And I'm talking about quite strong smelling stuff as well, not just things that are probably not very scented. So let me know in the comments if you have had this issue as well. It's very different if they see it coming. So for example, with Jim, if we're out and I want to play a little game with him, I will toss treats ahead of him on the pavement and he'll bounce after them to get the treat. And he's good at that if he sees the treat first. So I show him the treat, he sees me throw it and he watches it go, and then he bounces up and gets it. But if I just toss one when he's looking the other way, he won't even realize it's there. So it's more about his sense of vision and about seeing where it went. He has not learned to use his nose as his primary way of finding things. He's using his sense of vision. So I've not got any comments about that. Maybe that's just me. Let me know if it's just me. Mr. Piggy says he reads the picture varieties. You've lost me there. That probably relates to something further back. Is that the books, the picture variety books? I don't think Alexandra Horowitz does picture books. They are quite wordy, I have to say. They're quite thick. They're not the sort that easily get propped up behind a mug of coffee either. So we are quite heavily influenced by scent. And I remember reading ages ago that researchers did a study on the effect of smell on what we buy at the supermarket. So I don't know that they do this quite as much now, but they definitely went through a phase where they would pipe the smell of the bread that was being baked on the premises to the entrance, because let's face it, there's no normal reason why a supermarket should be constructed so that the smell of the bakery at the back of the shop behind the shop floor should happen to come out right on the way in by the trolleys, but it does. So they would deliberately set up to pipe the smell of the baking bread to the entrance to the shop. And that meant as you walked in the shop, you thought, oh, wow, that bread smells amazing. I must go over to the bread counter. And then, of course, off you'd go. You'd put all this bread and cakes in your basket and buy things that you probably had no intention of buying in the first place. And I think the same happens with coffee shops. Well, it does to me, at least. I might not have wanted a coffee, but the smell of the coffee as you walk past the coffee shop is just amazing. And sometimes it's amazing, even if it's a shop that I know doesn't do very good coffee, like some of the chains. But suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, I really want to have a coffee now. But I hadn't wanted one until I'd walked past that shop. So their product is sold, or maybe impulse buying is encouraged because of the smell of the product. And the same happens with dogs, obviously not wanting coffees, but they might want bread. But mine always check out my shopping when I come back to see if there's anything in the bags that they could be interested in having that might be for them. And scent can not only encourage them to investigate, but it can also trigger emotional memories. And this happens because the scent is linked to a memory that triggers dopamine production in the brain. So dopamine is the hormone that is linked to pleasure and rewards and fun stuff. And this boosts the ability to concentrate, it increases motivation, and it leads to the formation of associative memories. So this is an association between this smell and this thing that happened. So the two are linked in this associative memory. So that means when you notice the smell, you remember the event. So I can probably, if I think about it, picture a coffee shop by remembering the smell of coffee. So by combining positive experiences with certain fragrances, you can increase the impact of something compared with when it's not linked to a scent. So if that's something you've experienced, let me know in the comments. I think it's important to remember that there's a good chance we have no clue about the scents that our dogs are picking up and responding to, because our sense of smell just isn't good enough to detect them. So this could well be a factor. This associative memory could well be a factor when someone says, my dog behaved this way out of the blue, there was no reason, I've no clue why they did it. How do you know that it wasn't something they smelt, or something that they smelt when that happened last time has triggered it? I certainly know with Floppy that I will get quite a powerful reaction from him just when he is able to smell something that he knows he finds bothersome. He doesn't have to see it. It doesn't have to move. The smell of it is enough. So given how powerful their sense of smell is, it could well be that behavior is triggered by smelling something, not necessarily seeing or doing something. So let's take a quick look at the comments. So Mr. Piggy says, do they switch off their sniff sense when in the house? Yeah, this comes back to this sniffing is an active thing. Obviously, their nose is going to be working. in the same way that, you know, if you're walking around and you smell some coffee from a shop down the road, you're going to notice it, or they're fast asleep and maybe the smell of some food comes in and then suddenly they're up and coming to see what's going on. But they can switch it off, as in that if they're not actively sniffing, they are less going to be affected by the smell. So they do, to some extent, switch off in the way that we do. Alison says the smell, I presume, can be used to sell houses. Yes, I definitely agree with that. I have a very powerful memory. I seem to have a lot of memories linked to smell. When I was looking to buy my second house, we went into one house that was empty. And as soon as I walked in, I thought, oh my God, this smells horrendous. I could not live in this house. So this was using it not to smell a house. And basically, it hadn't been cleaned. They'd had small children, I discovered. The estate agent told us very delicately that the smell was children's urine. And it's like, oh my God. And I just couldn't conceive of where you would start trying to get that smell out of the house. You probably would have wanted to rip out all the carpets, and how you get it out of the boards underneath the carpets, I don't know. But it absolutely stank. And that was going to, well, it's well and truly put me off that house. And if you went into somewhere that smelt of coffee or flowers, or even the smells we associate with places that are clean and fresh, then that is going to, on a subconscious level, if not a conscious level, it's going to encourage you to want to be there. One thing I often wonder about is how smelly my house is. I do my best to ventilate it and get rid of the smells, but with 5 dogs it is a bit of a battle. And you wonder, how much do I get used to their smells and not actually notice that it's really not that good. So only have visitors in nice weather when the windows can be open. And Barbara says, what I found interesting is that when we got Bo, he did not use his nose very much, but we trained with treats, and now he sniffs much more during walks. Yes, definitely. I think they do you can help them learn to do it more, definitely. And Aileen says, we're veggie, but periodically cook chicken for guests. Our recently arrived Greyhound hyperreacts, really excited. Yes. I don't have meat myself. The only meat in the house is dried meat for the dogs, and tin meat for the dogs, and that's quite exciting enough. But whenever we have the more strongly smelling meat-based treats like those sausages and duck fillets, they get really excited. And I very much suspect that if I were cooking meat, I would have far more problems with them around the kitchen than I do at the moment. I mean, generally they're pretty well behaved about food and counters, but to them I don't have anything terribly exciting on my worktops, whereas other people surely would. And Denise says that her Greyhound likes the different makeup products. That's so sweet, bless. That's really sweet, wanting to sniff everything. Oh. So when it comes to good scents, they can remember those. And dog breeds vary in their baseline levels of dopamine, that feel-good factor hormone, which could be one of the reasons, I'm just guessing here, it could be one of the reasons why dogs vary in their understanding and also their responsiveness to training in scent work. Now, I do know people who have trained their Greyhounds to find hidden things because of a certain smell. I think with my lot, that would take quite a while, and I'd have quite a long way to go to establish that with them. And I do think this may not be the easiest thing for Greyhounds, or perhaps any dogs in the sighthound category, because ultimately those dogs have been bred to enhance their vision. And although they have those amazing long noses, I think the subtleties of scent work are perhaps a little bit more elusive to them than they might be to some other breeds. Also for breeds that are closer to the floor, because mine like to sniff things that are higher up, but certainly AJ doesn't routinely sniff things that are on the floor if it can be avoided, because it's not that comfortable to reach the floor. So if you have a dog that's closer to the ground, they're probably, you know, those sniffs are right under their noses then, so they're closer and more detectable, aren't they? It's a bit more effort to sniff stuff if you've got to bend down and it's maybe not comfortable. So they might sniff things out that are worth chasing. So, you know, you throw it, they see it go, and then they sniff to find it when they got the general idea, but they don't necessarily seem to spend all their time running around sniffing. I mean, if you look at someone with a spaniel off lead in a field, they basically spend all their time quartering that field looking for prey. Basically, it's a trained behavior, but it's also an innate behavior. It is what spaniels do. Whereas if you had a greyhound and you let them off lead in that field, they'd probably either just stand there and say, now what, or they'd run, because they are bred to run as opposed to chase around hunting in a small area to find something. So the general breeding affects whether a dog is likely to or not. They can also remember bad smells or bad scents or things associated with difficult memories, such as a trip to the vet or going to a boarding kennel or having a bad time with the groomers, for example. So in these instances, the scent has become linked to a more traumatic experience, or maybe it reminds them about being in a place that they were worried. So when it comes to the vet, they are faced with a massive array of scent left by all the other dogs who've been there and been frightened already. So they may get anxious just when the door to the building opens and not even want to go in, because they're faced with all that scent that we can barely detect of dog that's scared. And even if they haven't been unhappy dogs in there, they could associate the smell of products used in the building with previous bad experiences that they've had. So they could develop an association of the smell of that particular disinfectant or that particular cleaner or floor product with things that happened to them in that building that they didn't enjoy. So one way or the other, if they have to repeatedly go to that place where they have that smell, they're going to assume something bad will happen. So smell can be associated with difficult memories and positive memories. So one way you can use scent with your dog to help them is a way of prompting relaxation or building positive associations. So an example of this is I tend to use a valerian spray if I need Gandalf or Floppy to settle down, which can work in two ways. So firstly, the scent is calming in itself, but also if they learn to associate the scent with quiet time, then using it can help to prompt the behavior you need from them. So I often use it at bedtime or before going out, and I'll spray it before whatever is going to happen happens. So I won't wait until we go to bed, but I'll maybe spray it a quarter of an hour beforehand. So then that smell is already in the air, and the idea is I'm hoping that smelling that valerian spray means they think, oh, we're going to settle down now, we're going to be quiet. So you can use it as part of a signaling of a routine that indicates something to them. So it can become part of their routine. When it comes to taking dogs on a walk, I think we often have very different agendas to our dogs. And I'll put my hand up to this. For my agenda, I would say I usually have an idea of how long I'm going to spend on the walk based on what I need to do afterwards or where I need to be later or what's happened beforehand. And to me, if it's a walk, we're going to be walking, not standing around sniffing. We're going out for exercise, so we need to keep going. And basically standing around is kind of boring. So is this something you do? I suspect it's not just me, and you might not even realize you're doing it, but do you have an agenda for your walks? If someone said to you, oh, what do you do when you walk your dog? What would you expect the walk to be like? Let's have a quick look. David says when he cooks a turkey, he can't even walk into the kitchen. They come running in. Yes, it is a problem, isn't it? And Mr. Piggy uses calming wipes. Yes, they often have very similar products in. That's another way of doing them. I tend to either spray some bedding or a cloth, or depending on what they've got on, if they're wearing a coat, I might spray the coat. Aileen said, I bought a calming travel spray, quite expensive, and a dab of lavender essential oil on her jeans does just the same. Yes, if I'm using something on a walk, I might as well spray me as something the dog is wearing. You have to be a little bit careful sometimes with things the dog can't get away from. So if you're using something the first few times, you might want to spray it on something that the dog can move away from. So maybe not on a bandana, not on a coat, but perhaps on a blanket, and then they could choose to go somewhere else, or spray it on you and they can choose to go somewhere else. But yes, definitely useful. So thinking about the walking, Barbara and Denise both like to stop for the dog to sniff, which is fantastic news. You have much better agendas than I do. So what about the dog's agenda? Yes, they do like to get out. They do like to be moving. They do like to see stuff. They are sight hounds after all. So they do like to look. And I mean, Gandalf likes to sit in the car and just watch. When we travel, he generally sits himself down, leaning against the back of the seat and watches the view go past. He seems to enjoy doing that. And of course, that's all about what he sees, not about his sense of smell. So he's definitely demonstrating his sight houndiness in that way. But I would also expect them to want to sniff, because sniffing is their equivalent of us spending time reading the paper or scrolling through social media. And they probably find those things pretty boring if they're actually awake, of course. And they might actually be happier to go out for a short distance to some grass, to a hedge, to some trees, and just hang around and sniff. And this is something I've tended to do more with older dogs who perhaps can't walk so far or stand for so long. Take them somewhere either close by or travel them to somewhere further away that is interesting for sniffing. And instead of planning to walk around a route, we just hang out, follow them around as they sniff for a quarter of an hour or so, and then go back. So that is very much about the dog having the opportunity to sniff rather than going for a walk. So in a way, just by calling it a walk, we are putting a construct in our head that indicates to us what we're going to do. And I think that may be quite an issue for new owners. Someone who's never had the dog before, you say, oh, well, greyhounds need to be walked twice a day for 20 minutes. So you assume that you go and you walk for 20 minutes, but maybe you don't. Maybe you walk for 10 minutes and you stand and sniff for 10 minutes, or maybe you stand and sniff for 20 minutes and then you go back. It's not always about the actual physical walking. So where are we in the comments? David says, when coming home from a visit with another dog, there is extra sniffing effort. Definitely. I kind of see it almost as part of their enrichment. If I come home bearing sniffs, I just stand there and wait for them to sniff until they lose interest. And it's like that's been some entertainment in their day in many ways, because they can learn so much from the smells that I don't even realize I'm carrying when I come back into the house. So if I've been somewhere and maybe knelt on the floor or been near someone else's dog, then I have to be thoroughly sniffed when I get back. So that's giving them a bit of a way of bringing the world to them instead of them going out to the world. And Mr. Piggy says, Joe has fantastic brakes that make it impossible to move him when sniffing. Well, you'll just have to stand there and and admire the view. Yes, the bum sniffing. Yes, that's a regular thing, isn't it? One thing I've noticed with new greyhounds is that it can take a while for them to figure out that sniffing is actually allowed. I've walked plenty who just walk quietly alongside, and you almost might not even realise they're there, and they show no interest in doing anything except following alongside you. And that says to me that something has happened in their past to tell them that this is what is expected, that it's not acceptable to go over to that tree and sniff, or to pull in front or lag behind, and they just trot along beside you, because that's maybe not the most natural way to behave, to not be interested in what's around you, to not respond to the exciting things you can detect in your environment. So they've learned to do that, maybe not because they've actively been taught to walk to heel, but maybe by default as the best thing for them to do. And it can take quite a while, in my experience, before they even show they would be interested in sniffing things when you're out. So there are some, like Floppy, who are too on edge to sniff, not going to put his nose down and sniff stuff because he has to keep an eye on what's around him. And a big clue with this is a dog that is keen to pee, to mark, but they don't sniff first. So typically they would sniff the area, check it out and think, right, I'll put my scent on the top. But if he doesn't sniff it first, he's not overlaying a previous scent. He's just leaving his mark here and there and everywhere. Floppy does very little sniffing, but he does pee on a lot of stuff, on walks as well as at home. And that is often followed by a scratch. And if he has done something that has, or something's happened and got him agitated, that scratch can be really quite extreme, with sods of earth flying up through the air. And then he wants to move on quickly. And this is very different to a calm, relaxed sniffing and checking out what's there. So if you have a dog like Floppy or Gandalf, they may want to keep moving on a walk, which might make you happy because it ties in with your agenda for going for a walk. But it's actually quite a breakthrough if they do start wanting to sniff, because it shows that they have now become relaxed enough to stop and sniff. So if I go back to Jim, he took a long time to start sniffing on walks, but now he's obsessed by it. It's his favorite activity. And I have to, if I want to complete a circuit, then I have to sort of ring fence parts of the walk for walking and parts of the time out, and we'll sniff here. So we tend to keep moving if we're on a busier road, and spend more time if we're somewhere quieter, mainly because I don't want to hang out near all the fumes from the cars, and I don't find it particularly pleasant on the busy roads with the traffic. So I kind of think we'll walk faster on this bit, we'll hang out more on that bit. Time spent sniffing actually can boost their emotional health and well-being if they're enjoying what they're sniffing. In Floppy's case, if he were to sniff where other dogs had been, that would be quite upsetting for him, I think, given his reaction to other dogs. So for him, sniffing is not necessarily a positive thing when we're out. But if they're a dog that likes to sniff around, poke around in the leaves, sniff the trees, see where the squirrels have been and so on, it can give them a bit of a feel-good factor. It's going to boost that dopamine. So you can harness this for dogs that don't sniff when they're out. You can harness it at home with activities that encourage sniffing, like using snuffle mats or scatter feeding kibble. And with Floppy, it took months, literally months, before he would even sniff around in the yard to find food that I'd scattered. So I'd give him some food in a bowl, and while he was eating that, I would scatter other kibble round on the floor. And he was too on edge to even look for that kibble, even when it was there. So I knew he liked it, because if I handed it to him, he would take it quite firmly. But it took actual months before he would look round the floor to find some more for himself. And so that was actually quite a big breakthrough when he started trying to find the kibble and look for it or sniff for it on the floor, one of his little victories. So these benefits to sniffing means that sniffing time is not wasted time, but actually serves a very useful function which we can take advantage of. And encouraging sniffing is one of the ways we can boost a dog's confidence and help them to relax. And I think this is a particular benefit for greyhounds who are settling into a new home or need some support with anxiety. So it's well worth introducing opportunities to sniff into their day, whether that is allowing them to sniff you when you come in bearing smells from the great outdoors, or bringing in things that have got different scents on them, such as bits of branches that have fallen off trees or things you picked up in a hedgerow or something, or it's doing actual enrichment activities that involve sniffing out food. So different ways to incorporate sniffing can be really quite beneficial in helping your dog to settle into a new home and boost their confidence. Let's take a look at some of the questions from the chat. Oh, Jackie retracted a message which I never saw. Do tell us again, Jackie, or write another message. Denise says, can you explain why they do the moonwalk scratching the ground after weeing? Is it to spread the smell? I've been told one of the few places that they sweat is through the pads of their feet. And you get people saying on social media, oh, their feet smell like popcorn. I've never figured that myself. I've had some that have had really quite stinky feet. Their feet can get quite smelly. And I've been told that they're actually spreading the smell that's on their feet as well. It is going to help spread the smell around, either by disturbing the air or by moving the bits of the ground that's got it in. So it could be any of those. I have also found that they do it more when they're a bit agitated. So it says to me it's not the calmest activity, and a calmer dog is not going to do it so much, though like anything, it can be a learned behavior. Certainly, as I was just saying about Floppy, if he is a bit on edge, he will do it to extreme. He does it quite a lot anyway, but he will do it much more to extreme if he's feeling agitated. So it's clearly not necessarily a good sign when he does that. But yeah, it seems to be related to spreading smell, but whether that's the smell of what's been peed or adding smell from their feet, I couldn't say. Alison used to be on a mission, yes. It's hard not to if you've got another agenda. I've spent years of kind of clock watching, thinking, well, I need to get up at this time and I need to do breakfast by this time because they need to digest for this long before we can walk. And I've got this many walks to do and they get this long each, else it won't fit in because I've got to leave at this time. So you get up working back from that to the number of the amount of time you've got to allow for that activity. And it's very hard not to be on that mission. And I'm looking forward to getting to a point where it doesn't matter how long it takes before you get back. So Eileen says something not always addressed by adoption organisations. It can be tricky and pretty long term supporting a new adoptee to walk at all. It took a good 3 months outside to begin to feel okay. Yes, definitely. I so often see people putting comments where they're saying, they've been fine and now they're not. Or you've got this thing, because it is just almost automatic. People saying, oh, greyhounds don't need a lot of walking, 20 minutes twice a day is fine. But sometimes people want to do more walking, so they take them out more. Or sometimes it's almost like I must take them for the 20 minutes because this is what they need and we must do it twice a day. And you can feel guilty not taking them out if you think they need to go out. But sometimes it's better not to go. But if you're going to take that option, then you need to bring something back or do something else instead. I think that the mistake is to just not do the walking. You need to replace the walking with something that is useful in a different way. And I did do a video about options for things to do to kind of break down walking into its different functions and see how you might replace those for dogs that weren't able or weren't comfortable going out for a walk. And the sniffs came later. Yeah, if they're uncomfortable out, they're either going to start freezing or they're probably going to want to go faster, one way or the other, but they're unlikely to be wandering along looking a bit relaxed and soft in their body posture and stopping to sniff at random bits of grass and trees. That is very much the sign of a relaxed and confident dog, and the chances are that's not going to be how it's happening to start with. So if there's any more comments, put those in the chat. I'm going to start wrapping this up because it's 8:15 already, in the UK at least. So if you've enjoyed this month's live stream and would like to support the channel, we have the super chat button if you'd like to make a contribution, or you can make a donation on any of our videos or shorts. And to get more of the same each month, please also consider becoming a channel member. I'll have the link in the description if you want to find out more or to join. I will be back next week for the members only live stream. We haven't set the subject yet, so members who are still here, please let me know your thoughts on a topic for next Monday. And I'll be back here on the 25th for bits and pieces. So keep an eye out on the community post for more information on that. And I hope you can join me all then. So do hit the like button, as David says, if you haven't already. And I will see you either next week or the week after. So enjoy the rest of your evening or the rest of your day, depending on where you're joining us from. And I'll see you again soon. Bye, everyone.